Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we interview top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group. At Business Success Consulting Group, we create custom processes and tailor-made business systems so businesses can thrive and grow.
And today's guest is Jessica Fialkovich. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Angie. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm so excited about our conversation today because we're going to talk all about, of course, systems and processes, but as it relates to actually exiting the business. And I know that's the dream of so many entrepreneurs, right? They build their business, they work so hard, and they really want to have this amazing exit. And you are the expert in that area. So we're going to talk about that, but let me introduce you first. Mm-hmm. So, Jessica, you are an author. You wrote a book. You are a speaker. You are the co-founder of the Exit Factor, which is basically you help people prepare for exit. And then you also are the co-founder of Transworld Business Advisors, which you basically help. First of all, it's in Colorado, Texas, and Las Vegas, right?
Las Vegas, correct. Yep.
And that's where you actually help business owners, entrepreneurs actually do the transaction and actually exit and sell the business successfully.
Yes.
And you're a real advocate for small businesses, for entrepreneurs. Yourself, you had two successful startups that you sold. So you definitely walk the walk, right? I mean, you've been there, you have a great story to share, and that's why you can help others do that as well.
Yep. Yeah. No, and I'm happy to be here and share my story and just anything that I've learned along the way, both as a professional in the M&A industry, but also personally through the exits that I've been through as well.
Absolutely. So let's start with your story. I think you have a fascinating story, and I would love the listeners to hear it. How did you get started, like your business, and then how you sold it, and then how did you decide to become an advisor and help others do the same?
So I founded my first business when I was 24 years old. My husband and I were working for a big corporate company, and we both got laid off at the same time during the 2008-2009 recession. So we decided at 24, we were going to become entrepreneurs and control our own future. And we thought it would be fun to sell wine. So we founded a wine store, started off just as a simple wine retail store. But eventually, through opportunities during that recession, we got pulled into a bigger market and started dealing in high-end collectible luxury wine all across the US and into Canada. But about 30 months into that business, I faced pretty severe burnout. We were working retail hours, but we were also working across the continent in multiple time zones, and I just could not do it anymore. So I did what most business owners do, and I woke up one morning and said, I'm done. And I'm going to sell my business, and listed it with a broker. And fortunately, we were able to sell that business. It was a fairly decent transaction, but I learned a lot along the way about selling small businesses and selling mid-sized businesses. And that propelled me into my next career, which you mentioned was purchasing Transworld Business Advisors, which is a franchise. And I purchased the rights starting in Colorado. We eventually grew to Texas and Las Vegas, just because I had a passion and interest for helping business owners and entrepreneurs sell their companies. I still run that company today. We have a leadership team in place, so I've been able to step away, but I've overseen about 750 transactions. We've been the number one Transworld office in the world for the last 7 years. And through that, that last decade of mine is what Exit Factor came to be, is that I realized that most business owners, when they do go to sell, they don't get the most for their company, or they're not able to sell at all, just because of just some very specific things you have to do to position a business so it is able to be sold and be sold for the most. So that's what we now do with Exit Factor. That's my role, is helping business owners position the company so when they are ready to sell, they're going to get the most that they can for their business.
That's amazing. So what are the Let's start with the biggest mistakes that you've seen business owners do when it comes to selling their business, either preparing ahead of time or during the transaction. What are the common mistakes that our listeners should hear about so they can avoid it?
Yeah, I think the number one mistake is they just wait too long, right? And I did the same thing, right? I woke up one day, burnout, decided to sell with no plan in place. I'd done no preparation work. And I think really why most business owners wait too long is because they think that they're going to do it in the future. I hear from a lot of clients like, oh, I'll do it. It's not the right time now to prepare to sell. Like, I'll do it next year or the year after that. And then what ends up happening is there's something in our lives that personally affects us that propels us to sell. It's not like this perfect plan that we have laid out for the last 5 or 10 years. That's like just a myth of having an exit plan, 5 to 10 year exit plan, right? What really happens, and 95% of entrepreneurs, they will sell because there's a personal trigger that happens. They need to relocate. They face burnout like I did. Unfortunately, sometimes there's illnesses or family issues. That's why they end up selling. And because they've waited too long to prepare the company for sale, it's no longer positioned to get them the most that they can out of that business. So that is by far the number one mistake that I see in my career.
Okay, and that's for sure if they wait too long. So what is the right thing to do? Is it like preparing from the beginning, or like when would you suggest for a business owner to actually take those steps to prepare for selling?
Yeah. So it's like the beginning with the end in mind, right? Obviously, if you prepare from it in advance, first day you start your company with an exit strategy and give yourself some exit options, that's ideal. But I know everyone hasn't done that. So that's okay. Everybody gets a free pass. What I say is the thing that you can do, the starting point, is that you should have an assessment done on your business, right? I call it an exit assessment. And really what that assessment will tell you is, what is your business worth today? And if you have a future goal of what you want to sell it for, how long will it take you to get there? And what do you have to do to get there? A lot of times I see owners will have this exit number in mind, right? I say it's always round numbers. It's always like 110 or 100 million. It's never like 9.2 million. It's always 10 million. And so what the exit assessment will tell you is like, hey, you know what? You're only worth 2 million today, but here's what you have to do to get to 10 million. And that at least helps you lay out a path of what you need to do in order to position to get the most. So that's the thing I say, just start there. Just start with an assessment of the company. It's not very time intensive. It's not very expensive, but at least it gives you an idea. And then once you have that assessment, you can figure out, what is my path? Do I need somebody to help me work on this growth and work on getting more? Maybe you're already there. Maybe you're already at your number and now is the right time to exit. But unless you do that investigation, you're never going to know.
Absolutely. Okay, so you do the assessment and then obviously you start implementing whatever comes out of the assessment.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So what are some of the common things that a common denominator to some of those actions that need to be implemented that are as a result of the assessment?
Yeah, there's 3 common things that need to be fixed or focused on in a business, especially small to mid-sized businesses, entrepreneurial-led businesses. The first is financials. So keeping clean books and records, keeping consistent books and records. That is one of the main ones that we work on, not with every business, but with a lot of businesses. And financials, even if you've kept great financials, they just need to be positioned a bit differently when you're pursuing a sale. The second is also tied to financials, but it's profitability and profit margins. I see a lot of entrepreneurs that focus on growth and reinvesting in the business. And there's a change in mindset and direction of how you run a company when you are positioning it for sale. You no longer want to grow at all costs. You want to grow the most profitably you can. So changing that focus and focus on maximizing profitability is another area of focus that we have. But I think the biggest area, and the area that I think we work with every single client on in some capacity, is removing the reliance of the owner in the company. So most entrepreneurial-led companies, the owner is still highly involved to varying degrees. But when you go to transition that company, whether that's to sell to an external party, an internal buyer, or transition it to a new generation, there's a big risk if everything in the business lives up here in the owner's head,
Absolutely. Yes, definitely. Definitely. So let's talk about that. And I love that you said that this is the biggest part, because that's definitely my passion and, what myself, my team do day in and day out in terms of extracting knowledge and knowledge transfer and creating the processes and procedures. So let's talk about that. Why is that so important? And what are some of the key steps that you recommend to your clients to do in order to actually remove themselves, or even if they don't want to, let's say they enjoy working in the business, it's fine, or being part of the business, but at least have it. So if something happens, like you said, if they have to make an immediate decision, or if something happens health-wise, or they decided no more or whatnot, they're able to remove themselves, right? It's that ability, that potential ability to actually remove themselves from the business and not being held hostage by the business.
Right, right. And I think it goes back to risk, right? So business buyers have two big fears. The first fear is that when they acquire the business, the customers will go away. And the second big fear is that when they acquire the business, the employees will go away. And really what that comes down to is, are people doing business and working for you as a person, or are they doing business and working for your company because they like the company and the culture? And that's really, we have to shift the risk off of the owner relationships and onto the corporate or the business relationships, which will protect it, yes, in a sale, but also, if something happens to you and you have to take care of some health concerns as an owner, or even like, let's face it, if you want to take a 3 or 4 week vacation, right? You have to have some backup options. So typically what we recommend is reducing the reliance on you in 4 key roles. So the first role is revenue production. So anything that's tied to revenue, whether that's sales or marketing, we really want to encourage the owners. Yes, you can still stay involved in that if that's what you love. And as owners, we're still going to always be rainmakers in our company, but reduce the reliance on you. So if you're doing 80% of the revenue today in sales, like just setting a bar, like let's just get below 40 and then 10 and then, 5, like just progression over time. So there's someone else that's also producing the revenue. The second key role is account or customer relationships. So you don't want to be the only go-to person in the company if a customer has an issue. There should be other relationships in the company as well. And just like with revenue, we're working out of that role over time, but having that backup, that junior person and associate that can handle it. The third area is production. So this could be in a product-based company, like actually producing the product or doing the work, in a service-based company, like actually delivering the services. Same thing. You don't want to be the only person doing that role in the business. And the last is frontline employee management. And this is like the ideal last one to get out of. But if you are managing the employees from a frontline staff perspective, the business is less valuable than if you have a manager or leadership team in place. So those are the 4 key roles. And really, usually an owner is really heavily focused in one of those roles, not all 4 at all times. But the method we use is like, just have a backup, have a replacement for yourself, and slowly get out of that role. Like in the sales example, if you're responsible for 80% of the sales today, just set a target for next year to be 50%, right? And the following year, 40%. So you can get the reliance on the business off of your plate. And then if you want to sell, you can get a lot more for the business. Or if you just want to take a vacation, you can do that too without your phone ringing constantly.
Absolutely. That is a very correct thing to do, because that's where you're actually creating a real business, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to everything is you're really being a solopreneur, maybe with a few employees, because it's all relying on you, right? So if you want to create an investment, a commodity, something that is really, that has a value, you have to do those actions. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. And actually that brings up a good point, is that we were just talking in the green room ahead of this. It doesn't always have to be employees or full-time hires, right? You can use outsources, freelancers through websites like Upwork and things like that. That can be part of your team. So I think a lot of times when we talk to owners, and we're very cognizant of this because we want to maximize profitability too, is like, you don't want to spend a ton of money to get yourself out of these seats, but there's so many options in today's workforce that it doesn't just have to be that standard traditional full-time salaried employee.
That is so true. So true. I mean, I've done many episodes on that subject in terms of the, like, how do you actually do that, right? How do you actually delegate as an owner, right? You have to look at the different actions, that you're really good at, but you can, things that you're good at and you like, things that you're not good at and you don't like, just like there are so many matrices and so many ways to do that. But it is the delegation or having the backup that somebody else is doing, and it doesn't just rely on you as the owner. That's a key thing to do.
Yeah.
So let's talk now about timelines. So when do you like, we talked about, it would be great if it starts at the beginning, right? Or let's say our listeners are listening right now and they decide, okay, great, I'm going to get the assessment done. And then I'm going to figure out what are the actions that needs to be done. But when is the optimum time before wanting to sell or to exit to actually start the process?
Yeah. And I love this question. I actually answer it almost like in a reverse timeline. So if we start at the day that you're walking out the door of the business, right? You're taking your vacation to that private island, right? We start at that day. It will take you about a year to get that sale completed. So from the time you engage with a business broker and investment banker, it'll take you about a year, right? So now we need at least a year in advance to actually go through the sale process. But when buyers are vetting your transaction, they're vetting your business and trying to determine the value of the business, they're going to look back at financial history and qualitative performance of the business for the last 3 to 5 years. And what they're going to do is they're going to create a value typically on some type of average or weighted average of those last 3 to 5 years of history in order to determine what they're willing to pay for the business. It's the same formula that lenders will use as well, right? So then if we got a year to sell, 3 to 5 years of history that the buyer is going to look at, you really want to be positioned well in advance, at least 4 years, if not 6 years in advance of your sale. That's the timeline to maximize the value of your business. Now, can you sell at any point along that timeline? Yes, but you may reduce the ultimate purchase price that you will sell for the business, or you could risk the business not selling at all. So 4 to 6 years in advance is ideal. But like I said, some of us, we just don't know. So I think that's where it comes back to is if you run your business every day, like you're going to sell it, if you fall in that 95% of you have to make a quick decision to sell the business, which 95% most of us will, then, you won't be guaranteed, but you'll at least be very well positioned to get the most you can.
Absolutely. Good. So now I have a question. It's a little bit on a reverse side in terms of let's say we have people right now that are listening to us and they want to buy a business. They decided just like you and your husband at that time when you were 24 and, you got laid off with the recession. They said, okay, I'm going to basically start a business, right? But let's say those that do not want to start a business, they're interested in buying a business. What are the key points that they should take into consideration when looking at buying a business?
Yeah, great question. I call it acquisition, entrepreneurship by acquisition. And I think it's a great path. And I think honestly, sometimes it can be a path to quicker success and less expensive to do so. But a couple key things is first, educate yourself in the process. So if you've never bought a business before, it's worthwhile to read a couple books on the subject, maybe take a business broker out to lunch. It's a very complex process and there's a lot of missteps, much more than we can cover today's podcast, that you could make along the way to either off-put a broker or a seller or a lender, that will really impede you from purchasing the business you want to in the future. So first off, educate. The second thing I would say is prepare in advance. So when you're going to search for businesses, you are competing against thousands of other buyers. I think this is one of the secrets that people don't understand about the business for sale market is there is way more demand than there is supply. So in our office, just in Colorado, we have about 300 listings and we get about 1,600 new buyers every single month. So that puts in perspective of how much the buyers are actually competing for these deals. So if you want to really win the business that you want to buy, you have to prepare in advance, putting together what your story is, why you want to acquire a business, get pre-qualified by a lender, not just say you're going to go get an SBA loan, but actually talk to some SBA lenders and get pre-qualified. And then the last key component I'd say is really hone your story. So another misconception I think a lot of buyers have about business sellers is that they're selling for financial reasons. And like we just talked about, it's usually a personal reason they're selling for. And especially in today's marketplace, many of these business owners have owned these companies for 10, 20, 40 years. It is part of their identity, and the legacy of their company and their employees and their customers are really important to them. So the sellers are not just going to be vetting buyers from like a financial capacity, like, can you afford to buy my business, which is solved by the pre-qual, but they also want to understand what's your motivations for buying my business and what are your intentions with it in the future. And that's where I think really honing your story as a buyer and knowing why you want to buy a company and what your plans are for it in the future, and being able to communicate that to owners. Sometimes that will help win you a deal or win you a business that maybe you're not going to be the highest bidder on, but the seller feels very comfortable. So educate, prepare, and then hone your story.
I love it. I love it. It's so important. It's like anything in life. It's so important to have a purpose, like why you are doing something, right? You're not just doing it for the money or for the acquisition. And I think that's continue with your last point you just made. I mean, it is really what's the why behind it, right? So that's really important, and I agree. It's a great advice for buyers. Mm-hmm. So now we're one more question is for the seller. You know, that's, as you said, it's their livelihood, it's their identity, it's what they've done for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. What do you see happens after they sell the business, and what do you recommend for them to do in order for them to feel how do you handle that loss of identity, basically?
Yeah, it's a very real thing. And I talk about this a lot in my story. So I said I was very burnt out. I actually was at the point where I hated our business. I hated going to work every day. So me facing the day after the sale, I thought it would be one of the most joyous days of my life. And actually it was one of the worst. I woke up the next morning and I really felt like I had no purpose because I hadn't designed what the after looked like for myself. So, and the business had become my identity, right? I had become at least part of my identity. So what I recommend to people from my personal experience is have something to run towards for the day after. Don't be just running away from your business because you're burnout or done or want to retire. And running towards something doesn't mean you need another career or another business. Maybe it's just an extended vacation you're planning. Maybe it's some charitable or nonprofit work that you want to do. Maybe it's spending some extended time with your grandchildren, but have something you're running towards and something that you're planning to occupy your time for at least the first 6 to 12 months after the fact. Because waking up that next morning and really having nothing on your calendar and no responsibilities. When I say it on this podcast, I know people are like, oh my God, that sounds like the most amazing thing ever. And yes, it will be for a week. But after that week wears off, there will be some reality that sets in, and all of those whys and what am I here for? And all of that just really piles on and is very difficult. And I've seen both myself and a lot of clients go through some pretty intense depressive phases of their lives after what's supposed to be one of the biggest celebrations that they have.
Absolutely. That's why I was asking about it, because I've seen it as well. I'm very well aware of it, and I've seen clients go through that. So it's really important to plan ahead for the sale, just like you were talking about. Definitely work on the sale when it's time to do that, but then have a plan for after. So it's not the end, but it's a new beginning, right? It's really what it is. It's a new beginning, but the new beginning of what? And that has to be definitely well defined so it doesn't become a problem.
Yes, I totally agree.
Awesome. Well, Jessica, if people want to get a hold of you, ask you, contact your team for an assessment, how can they do that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So you can reach us at exitfactor.com. And actually, if you go to exitfactor.com/podcast, we put together a whole host of free resources, and you can reach out to me via email from that page and follow us on our social media platforms as well.
Excellent. And I will definitely have those links also on the show notes, but just wanted to also share it with the listeners that are listening to us right now. Jessica, it's been a pleasure having you on this podcast. Such a wealth of information, and you definitely know what you're talking about. It's very obvious, and that's why you said, you're an author, a speaker, definitely an advocate for businesses and business owners. So thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope this was valuable for all the listeners as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.